So I guess I'll start by welcoming everybody to the workshop. So, welcome everyone to this workshop, More Than a Timeline, the dynamic nature of adoptee identity formation. In this workshop, we will hear from Dr. Tanya Kaanta, who is a Korean adoptee and former academic. She has a PhD in sociology and an MS in student affairs and higher education, with a focus on inter-country adoption, identity formation, emotion work, advocacy, and agency. She is the current executive director and owner of the TIES program, which we see before us, focusing on heritage travel. The TIES program also provides free webinars and educational resources for all adoptees and their loved ones. So before we begin, I want to introduce myself. I am McDonald Morris, and I'm the Agape Youth Programming Coordinator, and I will be your room moderator today, alongside Annie Keene. I just want to remind everyone that training certificates are available for this conference, and I will put the links in the chat box for those two things. Your screen name must match the name you want on the certificate. So if you want that certificate, please adjust your screen name so that it will match that on the certificate. And at the end of the presentation, I will put up a link for you to fill our workshop evaluations to let us know how we did. These evaluations can be filled out at the end of the conference or as you attend each workshop. We understand that these workshops can be triggering. We view this as a good thing. So we ask everyone to lean into those feelings of discomfort, seek to understand, not to be understood. Please hold all questions until the end of the presentation and be sure that cell phones are all muted. So I will start by muting my cell phone. We need to actively listen to learn. These are workshops, not support groups, so please be mindful. Don't mention your child's or anyone's name. These workshops are being recorded. While we do limit those who can view the recordings to those who registered for the conference, we ask that you not share or state anything that you wouldn't want your child or anyone else to hear in the future. If a room monitor feels you are oversharing, you will be asked to stop engaging in the conversation. So if you have any questions during this workshop, please feel free to put them in the chat, unless the presenter specifically asks for anyone to unmute themselves. I will keep everyone muted for now so we can all hear the speaker clearly. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Tanya.
Thank you so much, Mac. And y'all, please call me Tanya. I'll actually be in person at a table during the conference next week. So hopefully I can meet some folks in person. And yeah, please do not call me doctor. So thank you so much for having me. This is an honor, and I'm really excited to share this presentation with you all. And so there'll be some talking, and then I do want folks to go into breakout groups. I'll have some questions that that you all can talk about in your individual space, and then we'll come back together, kind of do a debrief, a Q&A, and please welcome to ask any questions of me that you might have, and I'll share my information. I love connecting with folks, providing resources, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, and I apologize because I am not very technologically savvy. So thank you for your patience in advance as I work through Zoom. So the agenda is just going to be, I'm going to do a very brief bio of the TIES program. We're going to talk about identity and belonging. I'm going to present the nonlinear model that I actually created. It was like a long time ago, but that's my story. I'll talk about that later. I'm actually working to get it published this summer, and then we'll apply the model and go into breakout groups, and then we'll come back for Q&A discussion. Okay, so a little bit. Oh, sorry, a little bit about me. Oh no, sorry. There we go. So I was adopted from Korea in 1975 to a white family. So I am also a transracial intercountry adoptee. I grew up in a white community, white family, white school in Connecticut. Um, Pretty much the only one. Actually, there was one Asian, me. There was one, no, sorry, two African Americans. One was actually adopted. One Latino American and one Native American at our school. So we were like the representation in my school. Um, and but anyway, I ended up going into I went to school actually at Ithaca College in upstate New York. I was a music major. Yeah, Ithaca. Yeah, I was a music major, and then I changed my major actually to African Studies and Cultural Studies. So that's an interesting story. I know I was I speak Swahili, and then went on to my master's in student affairs. Yeah, I love Tanzania. I went on to get my master's in student affairs and higher education at Colorado State University, and that's also where I got my PhD in sociology, and where I really started to do a lot of work with the adoptee community, domestic and intercountry adoptees, while working in student affairs. And so that kind of led me down that path. So my MS focused on domestic adoptees, and then and intercountry adoptees, and then my PhD was more of a focused because we wanted more adult voices for intercountry adoption, which would be the Korean adoptee population back in the early 2000s. um, so I did go back to Korea. I lived there in 1999 for almost a year. I went back in 2006 for my research, and I was there for a couple months during the summer, then 2009, and then 2024. So this summer, I'm so super excited. I was accepted to the Red Summer Adoption Research Institute in this August, and I'll be working on my identity model, which I'm sure my advisor will be really stoked that I'm finally going to do something with it and try to publish it. So I'll be working on that. And then let's see, I've been married for 24 years. I have two kids, 18 and 21. I'm pretty certain my age, I'm 52, but we don't know. I was a switched baby, so my adoption records are not who I was. Like, they received a different baby when they got me at the airport. And then with my ties history, I was an adjunct staff, so they do heritage travel with adoptees and loved ones. And I went to Kazakhstan in 2019, and then COVID hit. 2023, I went to Guatemala, and then the owners were retiring. They asked if I would take it over because they really wanted it to go to an adoptee. So that is a long introduction about ties and stuff like that. Okay, so hopefully that you can hear this video.
As an adoptee, I know how life-changing it can be to explore the place where your story began. It's a journey that can be both transformative as it is meaningful, and you'll walk away with memories and insights that last a lifetime.
It's like the gold standard for adoption travel. I would highly recommend it to anybody who's considering it.
Okay, so yeah, that was just really quick 30-second thing about, it's nice to see the pictures and the families. We are actually also launching our first domestic program for all adoptees, domestic and international, for March 2026. And it's going to be a healing program in Sedona. We're super excited. It's about identity and healing. It's going to be a 3-night, 4-day excursion. And I can talk about that more later, but we're super excited because it's opened up to all adoptees and loved ones. Okay, so I've been told you all are like super awesome, brilliant, sophisticated folks on all theories and adoption and stuff. So I'm going to go a little bit more into, sometimes I geek out with my families, but so I think I'll be able to geek out a little bit more. I'm going to talk about some of the theoretical foundations of identity that a lot of us have used. And then from there, we are let's see. Oh, are you still able to see my screen? Okay.
Yes, we're able to see it.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm just going to go into that a little bit. And a lot of this, some of this you may already know, so I'm not going to go terribly deep. But it's just helpful to understand where I'm coming from, the foundation that I'm using to help create my model. So, okay. So I'm looking, and when a lot of times when people look at in academia, they're looking at the theoretical foundations of identity. Structural approaches really come into play. Those are going to be like our macro structures, like religion. I mean, family, you can argue is macro or micro. Religion, economy, politics, their positions within those structures and roles and behaviors. So that kind of really helps drive how we're looking at identity, what we mean when we're talking about identity. Then we have identity construction and negotiation. So this is us creating agreements in social interaction, like our personalities, our behavior, how we construct and negotiate what is going to be, who does what and who says what, and it happens on the micro and the macro level, right? Over time within groups and then within individuals. And then I don't know if there's any Goffman fans here. Any Goffman fans? So he talks about identity of the self and with the collective, and also just goes into the metaphor of life is like a stage, but I won't go into that. But really individual identity is shaped by and also shapes the collective identity you belong to. So within that collective, we have identity that's shaped between individuals one-on-one, and then collectively, all of those individual interactions create a group identity, a collective. And then critical consciousness. Folks have studied Paulo Freire, and so this is really looking, yeah. Mac, are you going to be in New York? We're gonna have lots of things to chat about. So identity is being understood within the social and political and dialectical. Dialectical is a Marx term, it's a sociology nerd term, about the contradictions within realities. So you can have something that is, for example, you could have something where notions of racism, right? Understanding the history of racism. It can be used to support and continue racism, and it can also be used to negate and try to fight racism. So this is that dialectical contradiction we're talking about. And it's really focused on the realities of individuals and advocacy for marginalized groups and communities. So that's that critical consciousness for that comes in. So those are some of the big foundations of identity that I used. And then I do want to, I know race is not necessarily for all adoptees, right? Because some adoptees, well, actually, let me backtrack. Race obviously it affects everybody, right? But what I'm saying is that some folks are adopted into the same race families, and so their life experiences are going to be slightly different than those adopted into transracial families. But we all live in a society. We don't live in a bubble. And when we use these racial identity models as precursors to help us understand adoptee identity, because it's a fairly new-ish field in terms of understanding adoption and identity. So they went back to see what was done, what are some of the precursors. So Black American racial identity Cross's work in the early 70s, that was like pivotal. It's like the first of its kind. And his was, a lot of them actually, what happened is they created like this linear based model. So where you start out in denial maybe, and then eventually, essentially, you would end up in like full inclusion and understanding and immersion, acceptance, et cetera, et cetera. And they do say that you can go back and forth, but the ultimate goal is to have that, final acceptance stage. And so that really shaped how we viewed identity in terms of the racial model. So a lot of the adoptees use that, especially like the biracial identity model. A lot of folks early on with the adoption in the adoption field were like, oh, adoptees are kind of similar to folks who are identifying as biracial when Poston came out with his work in 1990. So not all of these models are linear, of course, but it was just a really nice guide. It was good guidance. It was really nice guidance because it offered an idea or a way to understand identity that hadn't been understood before. Okay. And then I feel like y'all would already have access to all these, but if you do want them, I can send. So, okay. I am not going to ask you this question because I think y'all already know. This is more for a question of when I work with our families and adoptees. A lot of folks don't know the difference between race and ethnicity. And so that's something that I like to clarify for folks because it's different and a lot of people just kind of mush it together. But I am going to move on from there, but I will ask, so when I'm talking about the foundations of identity for adoptees, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's 4 areas that really speak to, in particular for adoptees, whether you're, and it can vary depending on if you're a domestic adoptee or inter-country adoptee. Yes.
Sorry, I don't see the difference between, I don't see the slides. Okay, here we go. There we go.
Yeah. It'll come up. It'll come up as I'm talking. That's just something I like to do before I even bring up one of those foundations of identity. One of them is ethnic and one of them is racial, and so that'll come up. Yeah, thank you. I just like to know what folks know beforehand, but I feel like y'all have been in this for a long time, so that's not something I need to do with y'all. So, but what I will say is that there's these different foundations to identity specifically that create a foundation for adoptees and versus non-adoptees. And this foundation is not very solid for adoptees as it is for non-adoptees. Solid meaning that membership and belonging into these foundations are always questioned by other people, maybe even family members. And I'll give some examples as we go through this, which is very unique for adoptees. So for example, the first one is familial. And a good example for this is I can just use myself and I can use my partner because he's not adopted. So family, wherever I go when I was younger, it was, people could see, it was very conspicuous. I was not biologically related to my family. And people would always come up to me and say, Tanya, don't you want to find your real family? And isn't my family my real family? They are my real family, right? They're the family that has raised me. But it's from the outside, it's always questioned that this isn't your real family. And if I go back to Korea and I do find biological family, are they my real family? Because they are strangers to me, but they're biological to me. So this is always questioned. Which family do I actually belong to? Can I claim membership to this family without being questioned? Right? So I mean, throughout my whole life, oh, that's so great, you're adopted. You hear the narrative. But in the 70s and the 80s, the narrative was, oh, it's so great you're adopted. Are you going to look for your real family? Or, oh, so you were adopted. Do you eat at the same dinner table? And I actually said to one person, no, I eat on the floor with the dog. And she was like, oh my gosh, wow, okay. I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? You really believe that? And so this is an example of that familial foundation is always being questioned. No one has ever questioned, oh yeah, so your parents must be wonderful people. And that's another topic. No one's ever questioned my partner, Ben. Hey, is this your real family? Do you want to find your real family? They're not really your family. They're just, you know, your parents are just so loving and awesome that they did this great thing for you and adopted you and saved you. They saved you. He never has ever had that foundation. People who are not adopted they don't get that, um, those questions. Ethnicity, we can look at it in, so ethnicity, right? Cultural values, beliefs, that kinship, the community, religion, language, place of origin. And this is, again, this is for both domestic and intercountry adoptees, right? Even if you're a white adoptee into a white family, but you know, what if you're a white, you know your background is Christian, but you're adopted into a Jewish family ethnically. Can you really claim that you're Jewish? Will other people in the Jewish community view the adoptee as Jewish? You know, so that's just another example of how this ethnicity is always questioned. Well, that you're not really that. You are just like brought in. You're like separate, right? So that's something that, again, also adoptees, they don't have the ability to claim membership without it being questioned. Same with, you know, again, I'll use Ben. No one ever questions, oh, so you're like, you know, your ancestry is Scandinavian, and you have this like some of these things that you do with the Swedish tea rings. No one's ever like, but that's not really yours. You know, because it's just automatic. It's just a part, right? Whereas I'm learning how to make tea when I first joined the family, and I'm making Swedish tea rings, and clearly that's questioned. Well, clearly you're not really part of the family, right? Or I'm not really Korean because I don't speak the language, or I'm not a real Korean because I don't know what it's like to grow up in a Korean family. Next one, race. This one's can be very conspicuous, obviously. Physical, biological attributes, how we understand the self and others' perceptions. You know, I've been told that I'm not really Asian, but other people see me as Asian. Even my family said, oh, but we don't really see you as Asian. Well, I'm like, well, that's a problem because when I look in the mirror, I'm clearly seeing someone who's not white, right? But I can't be white. No one's ever going to say that I'm white. But then if I go to, I remember going to college, the Asian American Pacific Islander groups in college, and they're like, oh, but you're not really Asian because you grew up in a white family. So I couldn't claim that without it being questioned. So last one, nationality, right? Being able to claim that I am a citizen, particularly for intercountry adoptees. Whether you're adopted from Russia and Ukraine, or you're adopted from Ethiopia or Korea or China, there's this, are you really an American though? You weren't born here. So you're not really American. You know, on my passport, it says my place of birth is South Korea. It is not the United States, right? But if I go to Korea, I'm not really Korean because I don't speak Korean. So there's this constant like questioning of identity. So that foundation, no one ever asks Ben, are you really American? It's never a question, because his family has been here for at least more than 2 generations. So he can claim that nationality without it being questioned at all. So, okay, so though that's, keep in mind as I'm going through this model, that why some of these pieces are so much more influential on an adoptee than it would be for a non-adoptee, because all of these foundations of identity are not concrete. It's like quicksand, you know, they're gonna crumble, and you think they're gonna be a good, you know, place to stand on, and they're not, right? Because every day it's like, oh, when did you learn to speak English? Oh, well, since I can remember. Oh, who taught you? My parents. Well, where are your people from? I don't know, Connecticut. Where are your people from? No, mine are North Carolina, but where are your people really from? Like your people. And I'm like, you mean my parents? They're like, yeah. I'm like, the Mayflower? They're like, no, oh, that's weird. You know, it's just never, I can never have that just be my identity. Okay, So a couple other things to think about, catalyst to identity formation before I get into the model. And then I'll go through that, and then I'll stop talking and let you all get into your groups and look to apply the model, whether it's and I know there was this, you know, you can use it with, if it makes sense in like the work you're doing, you know, however it makes sense to work it through, but there'll be other prompts and contemplations for that. But some of the catalysts to identity formation that are very unique for adoptees, domestic and international, is going to be that detachment from birth mother. That happens for all adoptees. There's something biological going on there, social, familial, right? Just think, and these are not all of them, of course, but these are just some that kind of stood out. Starting school, puberty. Puberty is huge. Puberty is hard for everybody. And then add on this constant questioning of people being like, who are you? You don't really know your real parents. Or if you do know your real parents, why aren't they here? Why aren't they raising you? What's wrong with you? Da, da, da. You know, we've heard everything, right? All of the different narratives. It's a really hard time in and of itself. And then you bring all those other foundational identity questions into play. It can be very jarring. And dating. I honestly, for me, I didn't date because people didn't want to date a person of color, and I was in a white community. so that clearly told me I'm clearly not part of this community, right? Because no one would date me. But yeah, my parents saying, "Oh, but you're just like us." Well, no, clearly not. if my siblings are dating, but I'm not. High school, graduation, college, going on to you know, any trade school after graduation or high school, or what happens if you don't graduate, you know, those big life adulting experiences, death of a loved one, birth of a loved one, that can be a very huge triggering what's the word, event. It could be a very triggering event, right? Because I know for me, it's like, gosh, when I celebrate the birth of all these, my family when I was younger, it's like, well, my relatives are keeping their baby, and my parents didn't keep me, my country didn't keep me. You know, so there's a lot of stuff going on. So just also think about that as we're going through this model. Okay, so the model, it's a nonlinear approach to identity. And I just want to start off by saying, when I talk about crisis, we see that crisis is in the middle. Crisis in this regard is not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at Merriam-Webster dictionary, they have several different definitions for crisis. And so I am taking on the definitions of, it's an emotionally significant event or radical change of status in a person's life, or a decisive moment. It's a turning point for better or worse. So when I say crisis, again, crisis is not necessarily a bad thing. And when I talk about denial and avoidance, I also want to say that this is not necessarily a bad thing either. Just a quick side note example, like for example, if someone goes through something very traumatic and they black it out, that's an avoidance denial mechanism that our body does to protect us so that we can heal. And then when we're ready to work through it again, that memory comes back. Right. So this is not, I'm not looking at this as, these are not negative or positive terms, but I know they've taken on that in their language and their lexicon. Okay, so there's 4 elements to this model. So I talked a little bit about denial and avoidance. I'm going to negotiation, exploration, and redefinition. So exploration, something happens and you want to learn more about it, so you explore. Negotiation, the crisis happens and you're like, okay, how does that relate to what I already know, and does it make sense to me? And if it doesn't, I can either decide to avoid it and ignore it, or I can decide to explore more and see how that actually makes sense or not. And then I can either decide, you know what, I'm gonna go back to what I thought, or I'm going to redefine what I thought I knew, what I thought I understood. And this is constantly evolving throughout our lifetime. This is not something where you start here and then you end here. It is for all these different catalysts in our lives. For example, I was talking about that screen before. Things can pop up that we think, oh my gosh, I've already dealt with that. So why am I going through this crisis now and having to negotiate this information and do more exploration? Or, you know what, I have zero bandwidth. I'm putting that out. I'm not going to do anything with it. And that's okay too. Right. And then maybe come back to it. Okay, I'm okay. I'm at a good point now. And I think I'm doing more exploration. I'm going to negotiate what I know with this information and then redefine what I believe or who I am. I'm going to redefine how I see myself. So an example I'll use is one of my participants. And really, you can find this in any parts. You can even find this in yourself if you're adopted or not adopted. I think it's actually a great model to use. So we can also give ourselves compassion and grace that we're not beating ourselves up if we've worked through something difficult or something traumatic and then something still pops up. That's okay. And it's a nonlinear process. So Mike is someone who was born he was born in Korea and he was adopted to Sweden. And he lived in a very small town in Sweden. It was very white. His family was white. And they practiced assimilation back then. So the social workers were told the parents to assimilate him as much as possible. I think that was pretty common in the 70s. That's what my parents did as well. And so he just grew up not wanting anything to do with being Korean, being an adoptee. He couldn't hide being adopted though, because he was very conspicuous. And so he just put everything in the voice, because every time something came up with his adoption, he would negotiate what his parents told him, which was, you're lucky we adopted you. Your mom was a prostitute and you would have been poor or died or blah, blah, blah. So that was what he knew. So the kids would bully him. He'd negotiate that with what he knew. He'd be like, wow, okay, well, this fits. And then he'd be like, I really don't want anything to do with it being Korean. I'm going to avoid that part of my identity. And then no exploration was happening, because it just kept fitting with when he went into that negotiation phase. It just kept reiterating everything that he was learning as a kid. And then everything seemed to just compound itself, right? So by the time he graduated high school, he just knew he wanted to get out of the house. He left, he went to Stockholm. And when he went to Stockholm, he was approached by a modeling scout. And she was like, here's my card. Please contact me. This is not a scam. This is the company I work for. And he was like, whoa, okay, that was a major crisis. Now he had, just think about this also, he had many crises along the way during his childhood. Every time he got poked fun of, made fun of, beaten, his family was abusive. Every time anything like that happened, it was like a new crisis would occur. He's like, I'm not part of the family. The identity, right, is trashed. The identity of being Swedish is gone, because everyone told me he's not Swedish. He's not Korean, yada, yada, yada. So his negotiation was pretty much crisis, negotiation, denial, crisis, negotiation, denial, right? So this is the first time he's had someone tell him, I'm a modeling scout and you're beautiful. So he negotiates this. He's like, I don't know, this can't be true. But then he meets another person, another immigrant in Stockholm, and they start talking. Another crisis happens. And he starts exploring, because he realizes I have a lot in common with this other immigrant. And he starts redefining and saying, maybe being an immigrant is not so terrible. So he kind of comes a little bit out of like, okay, maybe I am Swedish. I am culturally Swedish, right? And then he finally calls the lady and he gets a job. And then eventually he's on like billboards in Sweden, because he's a beautiful man. So totally redefines everything. And then he decides, oh, okay, well, I'm going to negotiate this more, because I was originally told being adoptee is bad, being a Korean adoptee is bad. Now I'm being told, actually, it's not so bad. I'm on these billboards in Sweden. I wonder if there's an adoptee group. There's a huge adoptee group in Sweden at the time. Okay, so he makes a phone call or email rather. So and I think email was just coming out back in the early 2000s, late 90s. And so they like, yes, come to our group. So he has another crisis. He goes to because he's like, oh my gosh, here are all these adoptees and they're supportive and they have the same story as me. And I can explore more and negotiate and I'm in a safe place. I don't have to be in denial. It was protection for him. I can redefine that, hey, actually, maybe now I'm actually proud to be adopted. I'm proud to be an adoptee. And I'm proud, as he's getting the support. He goes to Korea. He becomes an advocate. He's all about agency and advocacy. I meet him in Korea. And he's like, we need to do more. We need to talk about more. He's totally going into that, the whole piece of critical consciousness. And he does birth search. Crisis happens. Birth mom doesn't want to see him. Major crisis. He negotiates everything that he's just worked he's like trying to figure out all this stuff. He's going through all these different processes and he's like, wait, that foundation, that family foundation that's supposed to be the one thing that's so key to our survival, right? We have that connection with our birth family is gone. They don't want to meet him. They don't want to see him. So then he goes into this place of, he negotiates everything, even though he's already done all this other stuff and redefinition, and he was like supported by the adoptee community. That was so shattering, that familial foundation that non-adoptees can take for granted. It was that core foundation just went away. And so he's like exploring, his exploration was like, this is too painful. I'm in too much pain. His redefinition is, I cannot be an advocate right now. I'm in too much pain. I need to avoid and deny this. I can't be a part of this community. It's too painful. I've negotiated, even all this other work I've done, I've negotiated, but I need to take care of myself. He didn't say I need to take care of myself, but that's a roundabout way is what he said. And then years later, I connected with him and he said, that was a really, really dark time in my life, because everything that I thought I was, my identity, had been built upon maybe this feeling of eventually I would find my birth mother and that she would love me. So then he had to go through all of this process, right, to try and figure out, okay, what is my identity then? And now he's like, I am a Korean adoptee, but it's painful. It's a painful existence for him. So he's no longer in denial. He's healed enough, I'm sure he's had other life events in his life, where he's had different crises to show that, okay, I'm negotiating with this. People do love me. I am cared for. I am loved, right? So you can negotiate that, redefine again. So it's just this ongoing process. So that was Mike's story. This is me when I was a baby. I'm K9048. And then also something interesting too, I'll just give you this little nugget and then we'll break out into groups. When I was, I told you I was a switched baby. Well, the files for the other baby, who is I am K9048, but then they switched all the files. So there's this picture, and then there's another picture of another baby, and that's the baby they follow in all the files. And then all of a sudden I reappeared much bigger, like a 2-year-old in New York City. But the fascinating thing too is when we talk about identity, like what's in the name? There's family, culture, ethnicity, nationality in a name, right? And my name is White Lily, okay? Which is white lily is a word in Korean. It means white lily. Paekop. It is not a name anyone has in Korea. It is the name of the orphanage. So when I go back to Korea and they ask me what my name is, and I tell them, they said, no, Tanya, that's not a Korean name. So the first time I went back, that was a really hard thing to reconcile. Like, I can't even claim a Korean name. I can't even claim that my name belongs in this country. And my name doesn't, Pei Cop doesn't belong in the United States either. But they're like, no, that's not your name. That's the orphanage name. And I said, yes, I know. It's the same. It's like naming a baby in the United States Open Arms. Because they come from the Open Arms adoption orphanage. So so again, right? It's just, there's so much involved in just even those micro interactions with identity, right? And so you can imagine when I go to Korea and I'm like trying to claim my Koreanness, and people are telling me that's not a Korean name. I had a therapist tell me who was a Korean later on in life. She's like, Tanya, that was really insensitive because they didn't even give you a Korean name. They didn't even give you a fake Korean name. And I was like, I know, I'm the orphanage. So, right. So that there's this going through negotiation process, redefinition. Am I really Korean? Well, of course I am, but they didn't have enough oomph to give me a real Korean name, even a fake one. Right. So then what does all that mean? Okay. So we are going to break out into groups. I would love for you to consider some of these prompts, but also if something takes you elsewhere, like, you know, there's just as a professional and you're like, wow, this is, you know, and your discussion goes in that realm, that's totally fine. Yeah, I want it to be free and open.
Would you like 3 or 4 breakout sessions?
How many folks do we have?
24.
24.
Mm-hmm.
Holy schmoly. Okay, can we do 6 breakout rooms? Because I want to give people enough time to each person have an opportunity to talk.
Okay.
I'd love for each group to nominate someone to share just key themes and insights. It doesn't have to be, you know, blow by blow of everything, or play by play rather. Do round robin introductions. I don't know if y'all know each other already, but you can share your connection to the adoption constellation and your interest in identity, adoptee identity formation. And then, and then if it's helpful, think of an individual in your profession or your sphere and how this model will help you understand identity as it relates to your role. And then any questions or contemplations that might come up that you want to discuss as a large group.
Awesome. Okay. So whenever you're ready, I'll send everybody to their breakout rooms. There's 6. Ready?
Okay, ready.
Okay.